Hey guys, what's cracking? Godsman here, coming at you with another deck profile. Today we're going to be capping off our Destined 1 deck profile series with the Destined 1 of Time, Liael Odium. The final The Destined was to be revealed, at least until the anime reveals a 7th one, and also the one to get her own cover card set, that being set 5. Now, Liael Odium is a pretty noteworthy unit. Not only is she used by a fan favorite character in the show, but she's also a retrain of another very popular unit in Liael Immorta, one of the only 2 retrains among the Destined ones. And if that weren't enough, Liael Odium also is very intriguing in her effects, harkening back to the Gear Chronicle type gameplay with a divine skill that lets you literally, not figuratively, literally skip your opponent's turn. Yeah, Liael Odium means business, a very powerful deck, might I say, and also one that, despite its short time since being revealed, has a pretty clear-cut way of designing it, since the deck is pretty hedged into a ramp and burst type playstyle where you aim to build up quickly to a bombastic turn 4, which is almost sure to kill your opponent should things line up for you. And as a result, this deck profile isn't going to be very interesting in terms of its choices, although I do add in a few tech choices as the deck does allow for a few flex spots in its overall composition. So let's go ahead and get into the deck. I hope you enjoy. Now, starting off the ride line as always, our grade 0 is going to be the Gear Quetzal of Sleeping Distance, which is the in-theme starter. However, this starter has absolutely no purpose within the ride line, so you could use any grade 0 that you wish. Moving on to the grade 1, we have Steam Maiden Tiglatt. Now, Tiglatt has the skill that when it's placed by riding from a grade 0, you reveal a grade 3 card with Liael in its card name from your ride deck and put a Destined timepiece into your order zone. So if this sounds familiar, it's because it's almost word for word the way that Progress works, except it's for a different token and for a different Vanguard. Transitioning quickly over to that token, however, the Destined Timepiece is not quite as intriguing as the system code Exceed is, as Destined Timepiece only contains this one skill, which states continuous in the order zone. You cannot write grade 3 or greater cards without Liael in their card names, and you may have regress gauges. So effectively, the entire purpose of the Destined Timepiece is to lock you into the deck gimmick. Namely, you can only ride Liael's, but because you can only ride Liael's, only Liael's can abuse the power of the regress gauge, which principally uses the ability to revert time, but we're going to get into that a bit later. Going back into the ride line, we move on to the grade 2 Life Cessation Colossus. Now, its skill reads that when it's placed by riding from Steam Maiden Tiglatt, so very specific to the ride line here, you put a card from your hand face up as a regress gauge and draw 2 cards. Now, regress gauges on their own don't have any inherent benefits, but you do tend to scale or have different types of benefits depending on what's in your regress gauge. Not the number of regress gauge, except for one particular skill, but mostly what's in your regress gauge. So Life Cessation Colossus here is somewhat valuable as you're able to put in a couple of key cards into your gauge right away from the early turns onwards, and also it is just a straight up +1 overall. This ride line is pretty decent that way, although let it be known that this ride line is technically only a +1 overall, so it's not quite as strong as your typical +2 that you would get from most Divines era ride lines. However, because it is getting your fundamental gimmick set up, you must ride this ride line no matter what, at least the grade 1 and the grade 2. The grade 0 can again be whatever you want. Now, moving on to the grade 3, the star of the show, Destined 1 of Time, Liael Odium. Liael Odium has 3 very powerful skills. The first one stating continuous on the Vanguard circle. During your turn, all of your front row rear guards get power plus 5,000 for each of your Distorted Bane regress gauges. Distorted Bane being a very particular normal order that we're going to get to in a bit. Now, the second skill states auto on the Vanguard circle. When this unit attacks, costs Soul Blast 1. Choose a card from your rear circle or hand and put it face up as a regress gauge. If you put a card, this unit gets triple drive until end of turn, which may or may not be a reference to Strides. You Gear Chronicle fans should be the one to decide. Now, the main event here is the Divine skill, which states Divine skill, auto on the Vanguard circle. At the end of the battle this unit attacked, if you have 5 or more regress gauges, discard 2 cards from hand, and you get an additional turn. Until end of that additional turn, this unit gets drive -1, and the ride phase and main phase are not performed during that additional turn. There is a lot to unpack with this unit. Now, right away, let's get into some of the nitty-gritty regarding the Divine Skill turn, as this is the main reason to play Liael Odium, quite frankly. Now, the Divine Skill turn at first glance would seem very bombastic, as it is an additional turn. However, because this additional turn lacks the ride phase and the main phase, there are some key benefits that you're missing out on. You're missing out on the ability to call units and play most on-place and act effects during that additional turn. And because you do not get a ride phase during that turn, you will not get a persona ride during the second turn. You can persona ride on the turn prior, of course, but because you are still getting a new turn and the turn skipped over, you lose the persona ride benefit when you pass to the next turn. So your second round of attacks are going to be a bit weaker than the first round of attacks. However, you can compensate for this somewhat with the first skill, which allows you to get 5,000 power for each of your Distorted Bane regress gauges. So the name of the game when it comes to Liael Odium is to get as many Distorted Bane regress gauges as quickly as possible, as that is your primary ramp tool in order to get more gauges quickly and also get more power quickly. Now, another issue with this Divine Skill is it does minus a drive, but this isn't as bad as it may seem, because you do get the ability on the attack with Liael Odium to once again Soul Blast 1 and get a regress gauge in order to get triple drive. Now, this triple drive doesn't overwrite the drive, it just evens out to become a twin drive overall. So your turn is going to be looking like a triple drive and then subsequently a twin drive with the triple drive ability, just in case your opponent has an Elementaria. They can Elementaria under that without a cost. Do keep that in mind. But there are some key benefits to this being a turn skip as well. For one thing, because it is a turn skip that also allows you the draw phase and the stand phase, you're still able to get the draw for turn. So even though you lose a drive, you still get the draw for turn. So it's as if you're still getting 3 cards in the bargain overall. Another good thing about it skipping the turn is that you're able to wipe away your opponent's defenses. Let's say, for instance, on the first round of attack, your opponent hits double defensive or, oh dear lord, the defensive OT. When you get the additional turn, they're going to lose all of that defensive power, which means even though your next round attacks would technically be weaker compared to Persona Ride turn, they're also going to be weaker by whatever defensive power that they got, so it all evens out quite nicely in the end. Plus, it does give you the opportunity to get even more regress gauges into your zone so that you can get even more power. Do bear in mind, though, that the 5k increments of power from Distorted Bane only applies to your front row rear guards, so your Vanguard isn't going to be all that powerful except for the effect of Distorted Bane itself, which gives power to the Vanguard, but again, more on that in a moment. Overall, this deck is a ramp and burst type strategy, as I alluded to before, and it's a very good one at that. Its turn 4 is honestly one of the scariest that we've seen to date in this format, and with any future support giving it added consistency and power, this is going to be one savage deck to look forward to in the tables. I'm not sure if it's a meta deck or not, but it's certainly going to be one that you have to keep a lookout for and understand how it plays, because oh boy, if you get blindsided by this deck, you're in for a bad time. So yeah, very impressive one here. But of course, let's not act like we're ending the deck profile, because we got a whole main deck to get into, so let's go ahead and talk about that. Of course, we got 3 Persona Ride copies of Liael Odium. Persona Ride is a very powerful mechanic, and this one especially could use it in order to just get as much numbers as possible to try and seal the deal on your turn 4. Now moving on to perhaps the most important card in this main deck by virtue of it actually being fundamental to your gimmick as a whole, we have the normal order Distorted Bane. Now, Distorted Bane reads that you can only play this if you have a Vanguard Liael in its card name. Now, when you do so, you may soul charge 1 and then put this card face up as your regress gauge. So note, that is technically the order effect right there, is the soul charge and putting as your regress gauge. However, it does then have an auto clause that says that when this card is put as your regress gauge, draw a card, choose one of your Vanguards, and it gets power plus 10,000 at the end of turn. So you do get a lot of value with this. You get the draw, the power, the soul charge, all that good stuff. But the real key to this card is twofold. 1, its effect puts it as a gauge. Now this means that this is a way to build your regress gauge without use of Liael Odium's skill. That means that by the end of turn 3, as long as you've seen at least one Distorted Bane, you should be at 3 regress gauges. That's the amount that you need at the end of turn 3 to keep on track for your turn 4 OTK, which I guess is technically turn 5 because of turn skip. We're just going to call it turn 4 because it's basically like you're getting a second round of attacks overall, right? That's the more big picture of it all. Anyway, Distorted Bane being able to put itself as a regress gauge is super crucial that way. And honestly, without it, you would have to wait until so many turns later, like I think like turn 6 or something without its use. So definitely a 4-up that way. However, there's another aspect of Distorted Bane that some people honestly didn't quite understand at first that's pretty nice about this card. See, the only thing about this card that you get when you activate the order physically is the soul charge putting as a regress gauge. But the auto skill to draw and get 10k, that's whenever it's put. It doesn't have to be put by its own effect. This means that when you place it as a regress gauge for effects like, let's say, Liael Odium's second skill, you'll still be able to get all that juicy stuff like the power and the draw without having to actually physically play the order. And this means that if you see multiple copies of this order, what you can do is play one normally, get those effects, and then use Liael Odium when it attacks, put another one from the hand as a regress gauge, and get a second round of that draw and power. Very, very good combo there, and it's a great way to bump up your Vanguard's pressure along with that triple drive already being fairly pressuring on its own. So yeah, it's a very beautiful system when it works, but we are very reliant actually seeing our Distorted Banes in order to keep up on the tempo, which is turn 4 GG. If you don't see these guys, I'm not even going to cap, you might just lose the game on that. So it's very ride or die when it comes to this particular order, and for that reason, among others, we have to run all 4 of it. We do run a couple other orders in this deck though, one of them being Affectionate Preparation. Now, Affectionate Preparation I run at 2 copies, and it states that you Energy Blast 2 in order to give your Vanguard the skill that when its attack hits a Vanguard, you choose a card from your soul and call it to the rear circle. Now, one thing that I'm going to just say flat out, this deck is not a multi-attack deck. Liael Odium is a 3-attack deck except for the Divine Skill turn, which it doesn't seem that impressive. I mean, let's be real, we duggied on Chris Rain's community for having this issue as well, but the difference is that Liael Odium's Divine Skill turn is so much more massively impactful and game ending compared to Chris Rain's skill that we gave it a pass with Liael Odium. But despite that, it is still nice to get some multi-attacks if you can help it, and Affectionate Preparation is one of the very few ways to get it generically in Dark States without the use of gear equals sudden banks, which is just as gimmicky. The only reason why I'm playing this and not Gear Eagle, however, is because I actually did have some flex spots here, and this does come up sometimes, but 2, one nice thing about Affectionate Preparation is that since it's a normal order, spoiler alert, we're actually going to be running the normal order tutorers, which is Avarice Wrester, more on him later. This is a secondary option to fetch with Avarice if you're in the late game or you're already seeing all your Distorted Banes like the god that you are. So we just have a second option to get with him, but it's just a couple copies of that option. So feel free to just fodderdize this by discarding it for PG or putting it, I don't know, it's a discard for ride, anything like that, right? It's not that important, but it is there as an option in case you're trying to put even more pressure on your Vanguard attack. We also run a 1 of Union of the Skies or Regardless piece. Union of the Sky is a nice defensive mechanic that allows you to get up to 25k potentially. You don't need a lot of soul to make this deck work. It really is just Soul Blast 1 every turn for Liael Odium, and that's about where it ends as far as your obligations go. So you can afford to get rid of a copy of Odium from the soul with this effect, or the drop even if. But more than that, it's also just a really good discard fodder from Riding for the Ride deck because it takes the place of an energy cycler that way. So it's a very versatile card. I almost considered Twin Cast Protection in its stead, but because we actually do have like a pretty easy reign on our resources, since Liael Odium's only resource cost is 1 soul every turn, dead ass, and that soul can be refunded to you just with Distorted Bane alone, your resources are really just up in the air for you to use as you see fit. So that's a really nice bit of freedom that I took advantage of with this particular Regardless piece. Now, for your main deck normal units, we have 3 Anachronous Dragon. This is one of the new Liael cards. Now, it has 2 effects, one being an auto in the gauge zone. That's a fun clause, first of its kind too, I think. At the beginning of your battle phase, if this card is a regress gauge, you counterblast 1. Choose a card from your drop and put it face up as a regress gauge. If you put a card, call this card to rear circle. Auto on the rear circle. When this unit attacks a Vanguard, if you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Liael in its card name, until end of that battle, this unit gets power plus 5,000. And if you have 3 or more regress gauges, you energy blast 2, choose one of your opponent's rear guards, and retire it. A very stacked card this way. But one of the nice things about Anachronous is that because it has the ability to put itself from the regress gauge to the field, this is another way of actually getting your Distorted Bane uses off, because if you have a lot of Distorted Banes, one thing you can do is discard a Distorted Bane, which puts it in drop, and then with Anachronous skill in the gauge zone, you're able to put it from the drop into the gauge, thus getting its auto skill when put as a gauge, as well as adding to your Distorted Bane tally for Odium's continuous skill. So a really nice bit of synergy there with Anachronous. But Anachronous has tons of other uses too. It's a recurring unit that you can put back to the field, so it makes up for the sort of break even that Odium provides with her Soul Blast skill. It is also a really beefy attacker. It's an 18k attacker on its own, and for a really just easy energy blast 2, you can neg a key unit from your opponent's field, so kind of a Swiss Army knife there. One funny thing you can do with Anachronous, by the way, is because it has no grade restrictions whatsoever on any part of its effect, except for, well, you need a Liael in order for it to get power or whatever. What you can do with this is, as a grade 2 turn, when you put a card from hand into your gauge zone with your life Cessation Colossus, if you put an Anachronous, you can then counterblast 1 and call it back to the field on that turn 2 and attack with it. So you can even get a little bit of early board presence there and have it remain there on the field for you then to just re-gauge with Liael Odium. Also note that since it says at the beginning of the battle phase if it's a regress gauge, on your additional turn, you'll be able to counterblast and call it back to the field at the beginning of the battle phase, meaning that if you chose him to gauge with your Odium, you're not going to have that empty spot forever. He'll be right back where you need him to be for your next round of attacks. So overall, super harmonious unit with your strategy and really nice to see like in your deck. So I run him at a 3 of due to space, but you could easily put him as a 4 of, and I don't think anyone would get on you for that. Next up is some generic stuff actually. So we got Black Sky Thunder Quaking Queen Leimina. And this is the set 9 cycler, or no, actually set 10, I believe. Now, its effect is twofold. One is that you can bot deck in Soul Blast when you discard during the ride phase to draw a card. You already know that. Most people know this by now. Now, its unique skill is also kind of nice because if you Persona Ride, you can call a card from your soul and then you may soul charge. If you are soul charging off Distorted Bane, you can find all sorts of nice things lying in your soul for you to call back to the field, so Leimina is really useful that way. One other funny thing I noticed about Leimina is there's a really funny combo with the OT that we run in this deck, where if you call it during the battle phase in a Persona Ride turn, which you can do it with your OT, you can also do it with Affectionate Preparation technically. You can then call once more and get even more wicked combos, but this is some extreme high roll scenarios, but I thought I'd bring it up just in case. I've actually been able to perform this on stream at one point. Another generic grade 2 we run is another 3 copies, this one being Famed Blazing Demonic Lady Oriens. Oriens is the set 11 order card, that being that when it's placed on the rear, other than by a unit card's ability, if you played a normal order this turn, you can Soul Blast 1 to look at the top 5 cards of your deck, and you call a card with grade less than or equal to your Vanguard to the rear circle if it's a unit card, or you put it in the hand if it's a normal order. So this, the effects of this are twofold, and it's honestly pretty obvious why we would run this, right? We are very reliant on the Distorted Bane normal order, so it's pretty clear that we're going to want to activate that as much as we can, meaning that Oriens is going to be online for most of your like important turns, being turn 3, turn 4. And Soul Blast is not that hard of a resource. Distorted Bane gets it back for you. Nothing else is really demanding that much Soul Blast. And if that weren't enough, this actually gives you the ability to not just tutor units to the field, but even dig for more Distorted Banes. You have to see them at the top 5. So the search radius is really nice. The amount of things that you can get off of that search radius of 5 is really pertinent. And other than that, I mean, Oriens is just almost cost-free kind of card. It does have that like almost immediate secondary skill to Soul Blast 3 for the draw on 5k, but you know, even though resources are kind of easy, we're also not building that much soul in this deck. So I mean, if you want to try and go for that, you can, but you could probably only do it once, and you best believe that draw better be worth it if you're going to be doing that, because you may actually at that point run into the risk of not being able to use Odiums, assuming you haven't been soul charging with Distorted Banes. If you have though, then you could probably afford Oriens. Now, the final grade 2 of the deck is Almanac Colossus. This is another new one. This one states that when it's placed on the rear circle, if you have a regress gauge, so yeah, it's Liael Odium locked effectively with just that clause alone, you counterblast 1 to draw and soul charge 1. Yeah, and no, the draw and the soul charge are both mandatory behind the counterblast, so you can't optionally soul charge. I wish you could, but you have to do the soul charge and risk RNG. It does have a nifty secondary skill though, which is that continues on the rear. If you have 3 or more regress gauges, this gets boost. Very cool, because as grade 2, you can boost as a 10k, which is very nice for your Vanguard, who's a 13k, or your Anachronous, because you are going to be having Anachronous on the field in your ideal board state, so he'll make magic numbers with this beast, going 28, 30 and a persona, and then extra increments of 5k depending how many Distorted Banes you have. So these get to be a really, really big, beefy column quite quickly. The first skill for the counterblast is a pretty decent one, and you know, because CB is whatever you want to make it for, just getting the draw off the CB is about your baseline value for a counterblast in the first place, so you could probably use this a couple times over the course of an average match, which is why it's overall 3 of, but Almanac is a bit of a debatable choice, just more empirically speaking, because it just depends on what your resources are going to do for your particular version of the deck, and this is just more of a typical resource kind of card. Moving on to grade 1s, we've got the main grade 1 of the deck, which is Avarice Wrester. Now, Avarice Wrester is the Order Searcher, and if you guys don't know what Order Searchers are, they share this very ubiquitous skill where when you place them on the rear circle from the hand, if you did not play an order this turn, you can discard a card from the hand to search the deck for any order card without Regardless piece, discard it, meaning it goes to the drop zone, and then it gets the ability to be played from the drop zone, and when you play it from that drop zone, you can put it on the bottom of the deck instead. So basically, you take any order from the deck, you throw in the drop, and then you throw it back as the drop as if you activated it, and that's your normal order activation for the turn. This is just so mandatory for Odium, it's not even funny. Not only do you get to activate Distorted Banes from the deck effectively, but because you can discard a card, that discard in of itself has some nice synergy. Being able to discard, say, a second Distorted Bane only to then, I don't know, re-gauge with Anachronous is really, really nice. Discarding anything else that belongs in the gauge, like an Anachronous, because Anachronous can put another copy of itself to call itself. Again, this is a very free and loose card when they designed it, so we can do a lot of stuff with that. The discard is also nice because we can discard Clockwize Dragon, which is going to be our next grade 1 we'll talk about in just a sec. So that discard, not an issue whatsoever, and being able just to get Distorted Bane transferred to the deck is just so mandatory, because if that order is mandatory, then this thing became mandatory by transitive property. Anyway, moving on to the aforementioned Clockwize. This is your grade 1 from the Festival collection, so it has that archetypal skill to Energy Blaster and remove it in order to add back one of your discarded cards to the hand. So really nice, because not only can you get your discards off Rideline, you can get your discards off Avarice Wrester, and you can get your discards off Odium's cost for her Divine skill, which is to pitch 2 from your hand. So there's a lot of opportunities to return discard cards back, which is why we're going to run a couple of him, but only a couple, because we're already going to be energy blasting for things like Anachronous and Union of the Sky, and you're only going to really need this once or twice. So to me, I try to perfectly balance the amount of energy blasters that we see in the deck to more or less have just enough to get most value off your energy generator over the typical course of the game, because you dig in this deck a lot, so it's pretty easy to see multiple energy blasters. And after a while, this effect to return one of your discarded cards isn't all that valuable, because you might just have plentiful options regardless to foderize back to the hand, so it's not that useful. However, it does have that primary skill to soul charge and get plus 2k when you call it, but the soul charge, much like Almanac, it's not optional. So if you do soul charge off of it, do be prepared to potentially suffer some bad RNG. Now, the final normal grade 1 is Ablaze Chimera. This is another Odium unit, and it says that when it's placed on the rear, if you have grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Odium, love you babe, you counterblast 1. Look at the top 5 cards of the deck, choose a grade 3 or less from among them, called the rear circle, and shuffle the deck. So yep, just a simple CB to +1 off top 5. It's basically like a counterblast version of Oriens, but unlike Oriens, you're not limited to if you played a normal normal order that turn. You just need to have a Liael, so it's very versatile. One funny thing about Ablaze Chimera is similar to Leimina. If you do call it mid-battle, you would be able to CB to call another card, but unlike Leimina, it doesn't need you to be on Persona Ride, so it's less value overall, but at the same time, it's also much easier to pull off, and that's its kind of that's its trade-off. We're only running a couple of it because, like with a lot of these units, they're not central to your overall gimmick, which is get Distorted Bane, rack up gauges, get 2 turns, win. It just helps set up your field and see some key pieces, and but honestly, with that being the case, it's already good enough to be in the deck, but I just ran a couple copies to make space for the other things, as you saw. Now, moving into just some of the generic every deck build kind of stuff, we've got PGs. I just ran 3 Steam Maiden Arlim because it's the most in-theme PG that we have thus far, along with an Elementaria Sanctitude, as you're just a typical grade 3 deck, so why not run Elementaria? We're running 8 critical triggers of your choice, and we're also running 4 normal heals because normal heals are the most reliable heals. For the more unique trigger choices, we're going to be running 3 Natalia, aka effect fronts. I opted for fronts in this particular deck because even though you may not be able to get full value off a front, and this is a pretty hot debate, and the reason why you may not be able to get full value off a front, by the way, is because Odium may actually remove one of your front row rear circles, meaning that you only have 2 front row by the time you're checking triggers. The reason why I went for Natalia is twofold. So first off, draw triggers actually do run the risk of you decking out because Odium digs to such an absurd extent that you may deck out after that burst turn. So if your burst turn fails, you might be almost out of cards, and that's just kind of sucky. It would just really suck if you had the full ability to finish the job after your divine skill failed, only to just run into the raw issue of you're going to lose to a technicality. So that's one reason why I don't run draw triggers. Another reason why I don't run draw triggers is that even though the front trigger won't always be optimized, there are some times where you are going to throw a card from hand to the distorted gauge. Like for instance, you could throw another Distorted Bane just to get more power, like right off the bat, in case you don't feel the need to activate on the next turn. You can throw an Anachronous, you can throw in a brick in the hand, like maybe an Affectionate Preparation if you know you're not going to or activate that order this fight. You can just get rid of that, and in those cases you're going to have the full front row, so you will be able to get the full use off of Natalia. And of course there's always just the most basic difference between the effect draw and the effect front, which is that effect fronts give you more shield, and shield is quite nice, especially in such a high power format like this. So yeah, for all those reasons I run Natalia, but if you ran draws, I would not blame you for a second, because draws are more ubiquitously valuable by comparison. It can get you pieces and stuff, it helps you dig, but be careful, it's lesser shield value, the digging could deck you out, and at the end of the day, sometimes it is nice just to have that extra bit of oomph on your kill turns. Finally, our overtrigger. This one is going to be the spiritual king of Night Sky, Nyx Lacelia. Now, Nyx Boy here is the one that I almost indisputably run for Odium, because even though they have a few different options like Amalga Hell to give you even more Vanguard pressure with that critical power, and you could like run draw power in Night in Bright Sky, you could try to just get the basic Ho Eidos Faro for crit and recursion. There's a lot of different options with OTs, of course, but Nyx here is just the coolest option. Not only do you get any card from your damage from the hand, which bear in mind means that if you damage check a Distorted Bane, unfortunately, you're able to then add it back to the hand and reuse it, super pog there, but you can call a card from your hand to the rear circle. So if you do remove a card from your rear circle for Liael Odium secondary skill, that's an open rear circle for you to use, which means that when you drive check into this sucker, you can then call any card from your hand, which can include the Blaze Chimera or the Leimina like I was talking about before, where if you do high roll Nyx in a situation like that, you can get a pretty solid 4th attack out there. And it is also just a heal and a +1 of your choice. So just a very, very powerful mid-range kind of over trigger that just happens to combo really well and push the limits on this normally 3 attack deck. Alrighty, that was the deck profile. So let's go ahead and take a look at the big picture and evaluate the relative strengths and weaknesses of Liael Odium as a strategy, shall we? So starting with the strengths, Liael Odium's #1 benefit is that it has one of the strongest win conditions in the whole format, being able to get 2 full force attacks against the opponent without a chance for respite in between. And thanks to certain benefits like being able to return their defensive value back to their original value, so no trigger defensives will be able to linger, thanks to the turn being skipped in between. So overall, you you have a turn 4 play that is on par with Blankmire. Very scary stuff. Another key strength of the deck is that its resources are very open. Since Odium is only asking for a measly Soul Blast every single turn, which can be compensated immediately with Distorted Bane among with other Soul Chargers, you're looking at pretty much a free deck. So whether it be Counter Blast, Energy Blast, or other Soul Blast, there's not any resource that Odium would not be able to accommodate, quite frankly. Now, power lines are also pretty good for your deck. You have Rearguard Columns that are swinging for massive numbers thanks to the scaling from Distorted Banes in the gauge zone. So at maximum, you could actually be hitting for 58k with a Rearguard Column without any triggers being applied to it, which is significantly good numbers. Triple Drive also adds a lot of stability to the deck, as you will be able to dig for a lot of pieces and also triggers to help with your offensive and defensive game plans. And the final key benefit of this deck is that it has a lot of space for nation generics when you think about it. You not only have space for your order searches, of course, but you can run a lot of tech choices, whether that be multi-attack enabler orders or other control options like Clean Sweep Dragon. The sky's the limits for Odium, so you can build whatever the frick you want, and again, it would be able to accommodate it, so that flexibility is a strength for sure. However, the deck has a lot of weaknesses to it, unfortunately. The number one issue is that it's heavily reliant on Distorted Bane. Without Distorted Bane ramping up your game plan and also giving power to your Vanguard, the entire deck just simply shuts down, and that is a huge issue. So you need to see this order every single game or you're doing nothing, son. Another issue with the deck is that it's a 3 attack deck except for the Divine Skill turn, so on turn 3 and any turn after the Divine Skill, you're not going to be that threatening for the opponent to ward off. And that turn 3 especially means that you're a little bit slow compared to some turn 3 decks, which isn't that big of an issue, but it is a weakness in certain high-octane formats. Furthermore, Distorted Bane needs to be seen to make your Vanguard columns actually be threatening whatsoever, as while your Rearguard columns are very strong, your Vanguard column suffers as a result, as the only way for Liael Odium herself to get power is from the 10k benefits of Distorted Bane, assuming we don't have any generic options. You could run Amidatana, which is an option I didn't bring up before, but that is the only thing that card does is give a little bit of power, so overall you need to see certain Distorted Banes and other cards in order to make Liael Odium hit, because otherwise it's just going to be a 13k with Triple Drive, and needless to say, not very threatening that. Another issue for the deck is that its game plan is extremely linear. You have a turn 4 win condition and your opponent knows it, so they are going to take the entire game to prepare for that one big burst turn. So you will have to expect a lot of defensive resistance from them if they know what's coming. And the final issue to talk about is deck out. Odium digs so egregiously from the deck with soul charges, draws, triple drives, searching from the deck to call to the field, what have you. Odium is just constantly eating away at your deck size. So come turn 6 or turn 7, you may not have a deck to work with, which would supremely suck, especially since your opponent would likely be on death's door after somehow surviving your Divine Skill turn. So do be sure to keep in mind what your deck size is, because that sucker is going to fade away really quickly. So when taking a look at Liael Odium as a whole, what are the ratings? This is a new segment that I've added on to these deck profiles, totally inspired by Rada, so you Yu-Gi-Oh fans, you know what's coming here. Anyway, the ratings are actually pretty favorable for Odium overall. Starting with power, we get a really nice 4 out of 5 for this deck. This deck hits like a freaking truck, and its turn 4 is one of the best in the game, as I iterated before. The only thing that keeps it from a 5 out of 5 is that sometimes your Vanguard swings are honestly a little lackluster. If you don't have more than one Distorted Bane being thrown on her, she's not going to hit very high numbers, so she is kind of the weak link when it comes to your overall bludgeoning potential, but still very close to a 5 out of 5. Similarly, consistency gets another 4 out of 5. The ability to not just get triple drives to dig into cards like just hard digging, you have good searchability by way of the order engine, being able to tutor out your key order directly from the deck. And then with certain calls from the deck with Oriens and Ablaze Chimera, you can then tutor out for any missing pieces like Anachronous or Almanac. So while not perfect consistency, its consistency is nothing to sneeze at, and you'll be able to achieve your optimal board state more often than not. Its recoverability, however, is a little bit lesser at a 3 out of 5. It does have some comeback options with with Ablaze Chimera and Oriens again being able to tutor from the deck to the field, and Anachronous is able to recur itself from the gauge zone back to the field. However, a complete board wipe can still hurt sometimes, so you may not be able to get the best board state back afterwards, so it's about middle in the road in terms of recovery. However, to compensate for that, the economy of this deck gets a fat freaking 5 out of 5. This deck has no cost that it could not pay, straight up. You can pay a lot of Soul Blast because Soul is free, CB is almost a non-issue, and the only CB that you really care about is from Anachronous himself, which is optional at that because you'll need to spam that card, and Energy Blast is quite literally anything you want it to be. She didn't even get support cards that ask for Energy Blast whatsoever, so that's quite honestly up to your interpretation. So yeah, the economy here is about as easy as it can humanly get without it literally having no cost whatsoever. So yeah, a 5 out of 5, no questions asked. The versatility of the deck is a 3 out of 5. Now, I did say before that you could run a lot of nation generics in the deck, and that is true, and that helps tweak the overall strategy, but that said, it doesn't change the fact that you are a turn 4 burst deck at heart. It is a very linear game plan, and while you can do things to try and add a little bit more toolboxing or alternative motives to the deck, you are still going to be heavily reliant on your Divine Skill turn to clear the game. So Liael Odium only really has one trick up her sleeve, a few minor tricks that you can put in there, but she is going to principally rely on that singular trick. And finally, for control options, this gets a 2 out of 5. The deck does have a couple of control options, particularly Anachronous allowing you for retires for Energy Blast 2, which is pretty good, but unless you're throwing in things like Queen Sweep option, that's basically where your control options end right there. So not too much control being put in here, but you could try to substantiate with some generics to add a little bit more to this element of the deck. So for the final grade, I'm going to give this deck an A-, which means that it is a tier 2, potentially meta contender deck. A very, very strong strategy overall. Now, it does have some weaknesses, of course, and I think that there is room for growth, particularly with allowing Distorted Bane to be even more guaranteed as a strategy, and also maybe a couple more ways to utilize the gauge zone for added versatility and recoverability options. Heck, maybe even some control would be nice. There are just ways to expand on this deck in order to make it a little bit more fleshed out, but as the one-trick pony that it is right now, Liael Odium hits very good, and I think this deck could legitimately compete on some of the top tables and make some of the best decks sweat. Maybe not the strongest deck in the world, and it could be perceived as a bit of a glass cannon comparatively speaking, but I'm pretty sure this deck will do some business out there. So if you guys wanted to invest in it and try your luck over at the meta, then honestly go for it. I think Odium has a lot of promise. And with that said, if you guys did like this deck profile, then please be sure to go down and check out the other deck profiles that I did. This is basically the last Destined 1 deck profile, and before we get a 7th one for set 5. So if you wanted to go and check out what I did for the other Destined ones, then please do so. However, if you're fiending for some more Vanguard content, then this is a one-stop shop for just that. Whether it be top 10 videos, discussions, fight nights, anime reactions, we do it all. So go ahead and check it out. And if you like what you see, consider leaving a subscribe and turn on the notification bell for next time I load a video. And with that said, take care, God bless.